The sun over the Plaza Mayor felt like a warm blanket, a stark contrast to the ice-cold wine in my hand. Then my phone shattered the peace. It was Madison. She wasn't just crying. She was shrieking. "They're calling the police," she screamed. "Strangers, they're in my condo." I didn't need to ask to know exactly what she'd done. She used the emergency code, strictly for fires or floods, to move herself and her boyfriend into a property I sold 2 weeks ago. I didn't gasp. I didn't apologize. I just took a slow sip of my wine. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Have you ever had a family member treat your hard-earned property like their own personal asset? To understand why I didn't scream, why my pulse remained at a steady 60 beats per minute while my sister was hyperventilating on the other end of the line, you have to understand where I came from. You have to understand the architecture of guilt I lived inside for 30 years in Chicago. The wind there doesn't just bite your skin, it feels like it enters your very bones, making everything heavy, damp, and impossible to move. My parents, David and Melissa, didn't build a home based on love. They built a structure based on utility. In their blueprint, I wasn't a daughter. I was a load-bearing wall. My entire purpose was to stand there silent and sturdy, holding up the roof so my sister Madison could dance in the living room without getting wet. They called it family duty. I called it a long con. The data points weren't hidden, they were parked in the driveway. On Madison's 16th birthday, she received a brand new European sports car. It cost $72,000. I remember the price because I saw the wire transfer documents on the kitchen counter while I was making my own lunch. When I turned 16, David handed me a bus pass and a 15-minute lecture about the carbon footprint of unnecessary driving. He called it character building. It didn't stop at cars. The disparity was a line item in a budget they thought I was too analytical to calculate. For Madison, they engaged private stylists and tutors. Eventually, they paid a tuition bill for a private liberal arts college that totaled $430,000 over 4 years. They paid every single cent without blinking. They said they were investing in her potential. For me, they said they were investing in my resilience. I worked 3 jobs while getting my degree. I scanned groceries at a 24-hour mart until 2 in the morning, slept for 4 hours on a stained mattress, and then dragged myself to class. When I graduated with honors and zero help from them, they didn't celebrate my grit. They celebrated the fact that I was low maintenance. That was their favorite compliment for me. "Catherine is so low maintenance. Catherine doesn't need us." They were right. I didn't need them. But they desperately needed me to be the silent investor in their version of family. This is what I call the trap of ruthless normalization. It is a psychological cage where one child is conditioned to believe that their suffering is actually a virtue, while the other's indulgence is a necessity. By praising my resilience, David and Melissa weren't honoring my strength, they were justifying their neglect. They transformed the act of abandoning me into a noble experiment in character building. It is a specialized form of manipulation that makes the victim feel proud of being exploited. I was proud of my scars because they told me I was strong, never realizing that the people who should have been protecting me were the ones holding the knife. I had become a diversified portfolio to them, the safety net they wove to catch Madison whenever she inevitably fell. I wasn't a person, I was a contingency plan. A risk analyst who had forgotten to analyze the greatest risk in her own life, her bloodline. I bought that penthouse 2 years ago in a sleek high-rise in downtown Chicago. It had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the lake that cost me every bonus and stock option I had earned in a decade of grinding. I bought it as a sanctuary, a fortress where the wind of my family's expectations couldn't reach me. But the moment David and Melissa walked in for the housewarming, I saw the risk profile shift in their eyes. They weren't looking at my home, they were looking at a family asset. Melissa touched the quartz countertops and called it wasteful for just one person. David nodded at the view and said it was a good investment for the family. They saw a guest room for Madison when she got bored of her roommates, a liquidation option if David's firm had a bad quarter, and a resource to be harvested. When the job offer from Madrid came, I ran the simulation in my head 1,000 times. If I left that condo empty, even for a month, they would colonize it. They would guilt me into letting Madison House sit, and within a week, I would be paying the fees from 4,000 miles away while she redecorated. I realized then that the crushing obligation to share what I earned was a cage they had built around me, brick by expensive brick. This is the invisible chain of the survivor. For 30 years, I lived in a learned helplessness, believing my strength was the only thing keeping them from falling apart. It is a prison without bars where your identity is built on what you can do for others, and the inmate is also the guard, convinced that leaving is a betrayal. I was a survivor who had survived the neglect, but I hadn't yet survived my own sense of duty. There was only one way to escape: bulldoze the whole building. I chose a discreet amputation. A real estate agent handled the listing off market. My life went into boxes late at night, and I lied over Sunday dinner, telling them I hired a management company for corporate clients with a strict no-family policy. Melissa called it impersonal, but it didn't matter. 2 weeks before my flight, I sat across from the Coopers, a young couple of architects who saw a future in that space. I signed the papers, handed over the keys, and felt a physical weight lift off my chest. It was an amputation of 30 years of baggage. I boarded the plane to Madrid with 2 suitcases and a one-way ticket, leaving behind a ghost house that no longer belonged to me. I thought I had outsmarted them and escaped the vacuum, but I didn't realize how desperate they were to be filled. I leaned back in the cafe chair, the remnants of my wine warming in the late afternoon sun as the video call request pinged on my screen. It was time for the exit interview. I accepted the call, and David and Melissa appeared on my display, sitting shoulder to shoulder on their beige sectional. Madison was squeezed between them, her face blotchy from crying, clutching a crumpled tissue like a theatrical prop. They looked like a tableau of righteous indignation. David barked first, his face filling the frame as he leaned toward the camera. "Catherine," he yelled, "we demand an explanation right now. What have you done?" I didn't flinch. I didn't even put down my wine. I just watched them through the lens of a risk analyst observing a predictable system failure. "I think you are confused," I said, my voice as calm and professional as if I were delivering a quarterly report. "I am not the one who broke into a stranger's house." "Don't you play games with us," Melissa shrilled, her voice rising to that familiar pitch that used to make me apologize for things I hadn't done. "You set a trap. You let us believe that condo was available. You humiliated your sister in front of the entire neighborhood. Do you know she had to leave in a police cruiser? Do you have any idea how traumatic that was for her?" "Traumatic," I repeated, the word tasting clinical in my mouth. "Traumatic is finding 3 people you don't know standing in your living room with boxes. Traumatic is being arrested for trespassing because you refuse to acknowledge that property law applies to you. Madison is lucky the Coopers decided not to press charges. That was my doing, by the way. I spent 30 minutes on the phone talking them down while you were busy playing the victims. You should have told us," Madison wailed, finally finding her voice. "You knew I needed a place to stay after the roommates kicked me out. You did this on purpose just to hurt me. You sold the penthouse behind our backs because you're cold and calculating." I really looked at them and saw the data points finally align. They weren't sad. They weren't even worried about Madison's welfare. They were furious that their primary resource had been liquidated without their consent. They were angry that the ATM had finally stopped dispensing cash. "I sold my property because I am an adult who is moving to another continent," I said. "It wasn't about you, Madison. Not everything in the world is about you. I owed you no warning, and I certainly owed you no access to my life savings. We are family," David shouted, slamming his fist onto the coffee table. "Family helps family. That condo was a family resource. You had a duty to share it until you were settled. How could you be so selfish? How could you treat your own blood like a business transaction?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. "I'm not treating you like a business transaction, David," I said softly. "I'm treating you like a bad investment. And as of 2 weeks ago, I have officially divested." "Let me be clear," I said, my voice dropping into that clinical, flat tone I used for high-stakes risk assessments. "I did not owe you that house. I did not owe you a warning. And I certainly do not owe you an apology. My compassion has been a luxury you have overdrafted for 3 decades, and the account is now closed. What I am going to do, however, is send you an invoice." "A what?" My mother gasped. "An invoice," I said. "I am currently emailing it to both of you. It includes the $400 fee for the emergency locksmith the Coopers had to hire because Madison jammed the smart lock trying to force entry. It includes the $1,200 for the professional deep cleaning crew they needed after you tracked mud across their white oak floors. And it includes the receipt for the 3 nights at the hotel I just booked for Madison. Consider that hotel stay the final dividend of my investment in this family. It is the last cent you will ever see from me." "You would not dare," David growled, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You are our daughter. You cannot bill your own parents. You have forgotten your place, Catherine. I just hit send, I replied, watching the sent notification pop up on my second screen. You can pay it, or you can explain to the Coopers why you will not. But David, if I were you, I would be very careful about how you speak to Ryan Cooper. Who? My father asked, the bluster in his voice finally beginning to crack under the weight of a name he clearly recognized. Ryan Cooper, I said, leaning closer to the camera so he could see the lack of empathy in my eyes. He is the managing partner at the law firm you have been trying to court for 5 years. But more importantly, he is the lead auditor currently investigating the $250,000 discrepancy in your firm's state pension account. The same discrepancy you have been trying to hide behind a series of creative accounting maneuvers. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like it had its own mass. My mother's hand went to her throat. My father looked like the air had been kicked out of his lungs. Madison looked back and forth between them, her theatrical tears drying as she realized the room had just gone nuclear. Ryan is not just some random stranger, I continued, my voice steady and lethal. He is the man who signs your firm's compliance certificates. And today, he watched his new home being invaded by a woman who claimed my property was her family's birthright. He watched Madison get dragged out in handcuffs while you stood on the sidewalk shouting about your influence. In Chicago's business community, reputation is the only currency that matters, David. And you just declared bankruptcy in front of your biggest client. Catherine, please, Melissa whispered, the righteous indignation replaced by a raw, trembling terror. You have to fix this. You have to call him. Write him a letter and tell him it was a miscommunication. Tell him you gave Madison permission but forgot to tell the real estate agent. If he pulls that account, the firm goes under. We lose everything. We will lose the house. I leaned back, feeling the warmth of the Madrid sun on my shoulders, a world away from their self-inflicted storm. I am sorry to hear that, Melissa. But as David taught me when I was 16, failure is the best teacher. It builds character. I think it is high time this family finally got an education. David's voice transformed. The bluster, the righteous anger, the commanding tone he had used to dominate my life for 30 years simply evaporated. What was left was the raw, wet sound of a man who realized he was drowning. He leaned into the camera, his eyes wide and bloodshot, ignoring the fact that his wife was sobbing into her hands beside him. He wasn't looking at a daughter anymore. He was looking at a lifeboat. Catherine, listen to me, he whispered, his breathing heavy and ragged. We are family. Blood is thicker than any audit report. If Ryan Cooper pulls that account, the firm goes under. I will be facing federal charges. They will take the house. They will take everything I have worked for. I am begging you to fix this. Just one letter. Tell him you gave Madison permission to be there. Tell him you were the one who authorized those state pension fund transfers as part of a diversification strategy. You are a quantitative risk analyst. You can make the numbers look legitimate. You can save us. I sat in silence, listening to his desperate, rhythmic gasping. He was asking me to commit perjury. He was asking me to destroy my own professional credibility, to paint myself as a criminal and a failure to save him from the consequences of his own greed. Anger wasn't loud this time, it was clinical. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a shred of regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a family crisis. It was a balance sheet, and they had been in the red since the day I was born. I'd been the silent investor in their version of family for too long, footing the bill for a subscription to a life I wasn't allowed to actually live. My parents weren't shocked by what they had done. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along. David, I said, my voice steady and lethal. You are asking me to set myself on fire to keep you warm for one more winter. But there is a critical data point you missed in your simulation. Ryan Cooper and his team did not find those $250,000 discrepancies on their own. They didn't stumble across your offshore accounts by accident. They received a tip. A very specific, detailed tip from an anonymous whistleblower who knew exactly which ledgers were being forged. The silence that followed was absolute. David stopped breathing. Melissa's sobbing ceased mid-gasp. Madison stared at me, her mouth hanging open. The only sound was the distant tolling of a church bell in the Plaza Mayor, 4,000 miles away from the wreckage of their lives. I didn't just watch the ship sink, David, I continued, the words tasting like honey. I was the one who opened the valves. I sent the files to the Regulatory Commission 6 weeks ago. I provided the quantitative proof of your embezzlement before I even booked my flight to Madrid. I didn't just sell the condo to ensure Madison had nowhere to live, I ensured you had no firm to return to. I didn't just leave a ghost house behind. I burned the nest so the vultures would have nowhere to land. This wasn't a miscommunication. It was accounting. And the audit is finally complete. The silence on the other end of the line was the most expensive thing my father had ever owned. I watched the realization sink into his features, a slow-motion collapse of 32 years of entitlement. David's face wasn't purple anymore, it was a translucent, sickly gray. Melissa had stopped sobbing and was simply staring at the screen as if she were watching a horror movie where the victim suddenly pulled out a larger knife. You did this, David whispered, his voice cracking. You destroyed your own father. You orchestrated our ruin. No, David, I said, leaning back and watching a white sailboat drift across the horizon. I stopped being the load-bearing wall. I stopped holding up a roof for people who were busy poking holes in it to see if I'd notice the rain. For years, I believed my competence was saving this family. I thought every bill I paid and every crisis I managed was a brick in the foundation of our bond. But I ran the final audit, and the math was undeniable. My competence hadn't saved you. It had crippled you. By fixing every crisis, by being the reliable one who never asked for help, I created a vacuum of competence. I made it so easy for you to be helpless that you forgot how to survive. Madison wasn't just entitled, she was atrophied. You and Melissa weren't just users, you were enablers who had outsourced your parenting and your ethics to your eldest daughter. I didn't destroy your business, David. I just stopped hiding the fact that you had already destroyed it yourself. You're a monster, Madison hissed, her voice small and sharp. I am a risk analyst, Madison, I corrected her. And you were the highest risk in my portfolio. I've spent my life being praised for being low maintenance. Well, this is what happens when the low-maintenance daughter finally demands a return on her investment. Real justice isn't just about the punishment of the past, it's about the architecture of the future. I am not interested in the justice of retribution. I am interested in the justice of the sower. I have cleared the ground. I have removed the weeds that were choking my own potential. Now, I am planting a life that doesn't require me to set myself on fire to keep you warm. I'm going to give you one last piece of character building, Dad, I said, my voice clinical and final. You told me when I was 12 that failure is the best teacher. I hope you're ready for the lesson. It's going to be a long semester. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. Anger wasn't loud this time, it was a balance sheet. I hit the end call button. Then, one by one, I opened my contacts. I blocked David. I blocked Melissa. I blocked Madison. I opened the family spreadsheet I had maintained for years, the one tracking their debts, their crises, their constant overdrafts on my life, and I hit delete. That night, for the first time in my adult life, I slept through until morning. There was no noise, no guilt, and no weight on my chest. I watched the sunrise over Madrid and realized it was the first breath I had taken in a room that finally had enough oxygen. 6 months have passed since I hung up that phone. 6 months of absolute, intentional silence. I didn't just block their numbers, I blocked the very idea of them. I learned through a former colleague on LinkedIn that my father's firm took a massive hit. Ryan Cooper didn't just pull the account, he told his entire professional network exactly why. In business, trust is the only currency that matters, and David had proven he could not control his own assets, let alone respect anyone else's. The catastrophic revenue loss forced a brutal restructuring, and they had to downsize everything. That downsizing had the exact effect I predicted. The Madison subsidy finally dried up. David and Melissa could no longer afford to keep her as a pet, paying for a lifestyle she never earned. Last week, I saw a status update from a mutual cousin. Madison has a job. A real one. She is working as a receptionist at a dental office in Bellevue. It isn't glamorous, and it certainly isn't the high-fashion life she felt entitled to, but it is hers. The vacuum of competence worked. By removing myself and refusing to be the crutch, I forced them to finally learn how to walk. It wasn't an act of cruelty, it was the most necessary thing I have ever done for them, and for myself. I sit now at a small iron table in the Alfama district of Lisbon. The air smells of salt, grilled sardines, and new beginnings. The waiter places a warm pastel de nata and a bica in front of me. I am alone. For 32 years, I thought this kind of solitude would feel like failure or a punishment. Instead, I watch the yellow tram rattle down the steep cobblestone street against the blue sky, and I realize what it actually feels like. It feels like victory. It is the first breath you take after stepping out of a room that was slowly running out of oxygen. This is the justice of the sower. I have cleared the ground, and for the first time, I am planting for myself. I am solitary. I am at peace. I am free. If you've ever had to burn a bridge to stop yourself from crossing back over it, hit that like button. Share this with the responsible one in your life who needs to hear it is okay to put themselves first. Subscribe for more stories about finding your freedom.